Hey gang, welcome back to Joe Daddy's Garage. Today's video is part 35 in the 68 Mustang Fastback build known as Fangled. Now this car started off as a coupe and I have been building it up using dynacorn parts. So if you haven't seen the whole series, I suggest you start watching from the beginning to see what's going on. There is all of the sheet metal being assembled. There is the TCI suspension going underneath it, and there are videos on the fitment of the Coyote engine and the 6R80 transmission, working on the transmission tunnel, the shifter, all kinds of stuff. So there's lots of details in the videos that I've already posted, and I encourage you, go watch them so you get an idea. But right now, what I'm trying to do is continue with some of the sheet metal work. In the previous video, I installed the dash, and I showed you how to do that, and everything went very well, and I'm very happy with that. Now I'm trying to finish up the front end. So I want to get the core support in, and I need to fine-tune the fenders. Now I don't have a set of original Ford fenders. When I started with this car, it was damaged. It had been wrecked. So the back end had been hit. I think it had been hit in the front end, and there may be some damage to like the hood that I have. But the fenders, they'd already been replaced, and they were aftermarket fenders, not the best quality. So I ordered a set of fenders through dynacorn, and that's what I'm using. Now these are a little bit thicker than the aftermarket fenders you normally get, and they fit pretty good, but there's some work that's going to have to happen. I'm going to show you some of that. But what I want to do is address the core support, get it in place, get it welded in, check that off, and say that it's done. Along with that, once I get the core support where I want it, I'm going to continue, as I said, working on the fenders. Now I'm going to show you some of that stuff and what's been going on and where I'm at in the project. So like I said, I want to get the core support in, and the one thing that had been kind of off on this is this upper hole on the driver's side. It's just not quite in the right spot. So I took a little time and I used a rotary file and chewed out the hole a little bit so that it would clear the nut plate hole in the apron. So now that that's taken care of, I can go through and basically put some holes in this, and once I have the holes punched in where I want them, I can set it up in place and start welding. You also may have seen I made this part of the core support removable, and those have 3 bolts holding it on each end, or this has 3 bolts holding it on each end, held in with nutserts. So there'll be more on that later. I'm going to have to consider potential problems. If this is taken out, you still have that vertical piece here, and Dawn's manufacturer had mentioned that on my live stream. I was like, you know what, I have to think about that, but I'm not worried about that at the moment. As I go on with the car here and I'm looking at what fits and what doesn't, I started getting out the trim, because ultimately this piece of trim is going to sit basically where you see it, and if you'll notice, there's a bit of a gap right here. So I actually looked at some of my older videos with Jade, and I put the trim in, and the trim actually covers this part of the fender. Well, what do? I think ultimately I need to get this fender to move back, maybe 3/16 of an inch, maybe. Now if that happens, I'm still not confident this is going to cover that part of the fender. I may end up cutting this and moving that lip or that shoulder back, just to make sure it tucks underneath here and fits nice. So I've got everything pretty much adjusted. I still have a little bit of room. I can move this door back maybe 1/16 of an inch, not much, just enough. And I've got room to move the fender back a little more, but I'm having trouble with stuff like this right now. It's contacting the A-pillar, and it may be hitting somewhere up in here. At least I know it is on the driver's side. So if I go over there and show you that, you'll see there's witness marks, and that's where the fender is rubbing on the cowl and the A-pillar. In fact, you can see I rubbed all the paint off, or the weld-through primer off of there, and then there's a little contact point right there. So what I'm trying to do, I put a mark here, and I put the same mark on the fender, so I have a reference when I'm trying to move stuff. I've also adjusted this door about as tight as I want to get it. So That's my normal about paint stick thickness. That's pretty tight, but it looks good. And I've also lined up the front edge of the door with the rocker panel. That's exactly how you want it to look, to flow straight through. The gap is even on the bottom, and it looks really good. So what I need to do, as I've been taking this on and off, is make some adjustments. Like I don't want that rubbing, and I don't want that making contact. So on the fender, this is my other mark that I put, and I put about 1/8 of an inch, maybe move about 1/8 of an inch. But what I have to do is get this part of the fender up, not this part, not the front section. That's all good. I need to get this portion to come up. Now, this is where it's making contact on the A-pillar. So that tells me something's not quite right with this fender. And also the rubbing is back here on this section. That's pretty easy. But I think what I'm may end up doing here, there's 2 spot welds, and I may drill those through and take this part of the fender and massage it up a little and create a better angle or curve in this area. That'll allow the fender to come back a little more without hitting the A-pillar, and then cleaning it up down here will help with contact, or not making contact anymore. So ultimately, move this back, and then the other problem I'm seeing is down here, and I know Anthony Amato is making adjustments on a fender. I think he made the same fender, but this part of the fender is making contact with the rocker panel. So it can't come in any further. I may end up moving this hole. Like I may make it bigger, moving outboard, and take this side and move it in, or further outboard, and just relocate the hole a little more so that it can drop in against the rocker panel better. So always test fit. I've got the 2 hoods here. That is a hood that was on the car that I had used for a rough mock-up, showing where the hole may end up being. We're not going to be able to use that for multiple reasons, but I'm not so sure that hood is in the right shape anyway. And I have this hood, which was on the blue car that I call Poco, and this one is in good shape. So I've put it on. I've had it sitting on the fenders a couple times, and it looks good sitting up there. So I'm going to continue on with this. I'm going to get this core support taken care of, and then I'm going to move on to playing with the fenders a little more. So to start this process, I want to indicate where the holes need to be, or at least where I feel like they need to be. And I'm tracing the back edge of the apron onto the core support, because I'm going to have to do some effort there. And I find out that the Sharpie is no good, so I throw it down and start over. But I'm going to trace this back edge so that I can bare the metal, so that when I do use the pinch welder, it makes good contact. I do this on the other side as well. I trace it out, and then I mark on top of the front box piece where I want it to make contact or have a couple of plug welds. So I do the 2 on top and the 2 on the inside against the extension of that frame rail. Later on, I'll put some on the bottom, but there's another piece inside of this. So I take the core support off, and right there you can see that extra little flange. There's actually another flange in there, but you can't weld it, so you can't do anything with it. It's inside of the box. But in this case, I'm just going to indicate where those 2 holes need to go. I'm going to line them up with that tongue or that flange. And then on the bottom, using that as a reference, I'm going to put 3 on the bottom. And so I'll just make a triangular, pattern there. Nothing critical. And 2 would probably do, but I'm going to put 3 anyway. So from there, I end up using this punch tool that I got off of Amazon. I always talk about this, and I post links about it, or links to it in my description box. This thing is fantastic. Makes a 5/16 hole, and it'll punch through any kind of sheet metal like this. This is a little bit thicker than your normal sheet metal you would have on, say, a fender or something like that, but it still punches through. There you saw I could not get it to go into that one section, and that's simply because it's not designed to fit in there. I can't put it in anywhere that body will put up a fight. You can see there, it just won't work. So I decided to just punch the holes in the top where it overlaps the apron, and I did it differently on from side to side simply because of the way the aprons are shaped. So I get those done, and then I break out the cordless drill and start punching holes. So you see I wobble the drill bit. Sometimes that helps to make the hole cut or make the drill cut better. And punch 2 more holes here, and then I get out the step drill and upsize those to roughly about 5/16. I don't measure them or anything. I just kind of eyeball it. I've been doing this so long that I don't really think about it that much. So I get these holes in, and I repeat the process on the other side. But what I want to do before that is bare the metal where the contact is on the face of the aprons. So I'm not getting carried away. I'm just sanding down that front or that narrow path or narrow edge, because that apron only has like maybe a 1/2 inch of a flange. And then I'm deburring the inside of these holes from where I drilled, because it won't sit flush against the frame rails if you don't. So repeat the same thing on this side. I want to make, the metal bare where it's going to make contact. And there's more to play with that later on, something I had to learn about the spot weld machine. All right, I have punched holes where I want them, and I'll show you where those correspond. You've probably seen it already. Got the holes up here on the top side of the box channel, and then I just did 3 on the bottom. Now I sanded this area because I plan to use the spot welder that I have. And rather than have a whole bunch of holes there and weld them shut, just use a spot welder. Also punched a couple holes at the top on the passenger side, and then on the driver's side I did 2, but I spread them out a little bit more. And so what I was pointing to was this flange right here. That face of that box is going to attach there. And you'll also notice that the end pieces on the frame rails are angled, right? Well, they're both angled, but the way this is shaped, it is squared off. Not a big deal, but once I get this on the where I want it, I'm probably going to cut that off. You can see I drew a line there. There's no reason to have it. It doesn't help anything. It doesn't hurt anything, but just remove it if you want to. If not, leave it. That's fine too. So I'm going to get this up in place. I've also removed the nut plate, the nut clip that was on this side, because the top part of the core support welds directly to that, and then the nut clip will go over both pieces. So it's time to get this permanent. Now that I feel like I've prepped the core support enough, I want to get it in place. So line it up, get out the vice grips, start clamping it down, and making sure everything is good, making good contact. So up on top there, I put one on top, and then I come into this lower flange or this mid flange on the apron. And that apron flange, like I said, it's only about a 1/2 inch wide. I also put vice grips on the front where it meets the frame rail, and then just to make sure I tap that back to make sure it's tight against the frame rail boxes. So get out the first test DP200. I set the gauge thickness for the metal that I'm going to be welding here, and once I get that set, then I move on to start welding. So I started down at the bottom, getting in the top plug welds on top of the frame rails. And this is great because it's thick metal. You can turn the heat up on these and burn them in really good. A little bit of smoke there. And then I work on the front edge as well, where that flange is. So I get those welded in, and I work on the outer contact point with the frame rail. Like I said, you can really turn the heat up on these. It burns it in pretty good. And then I welded the bottom hole, and I pointed out earlier about notching off or cutting off the piece of extra metal. And I should have made that hole just a little bit higher where it meets that angle. It doesn't hurt anything. It's all welded solid, but you could have made that just a little bit higher. So I get these welded in place, and once I have these taken care of, I'm going to worry about the underside or the bottom ones later. So on top here, I put clamps on to make sure we've got everything nice and tight, and then fill in these plug welds on top of the apron with the core support. So get this side taken care of, and hang the clamps, get them out of the way, move to the driver's side and do the same thing. And this one, you know, it's got a wider flange, basically. The apron is wider, and that's because the battery box is on the passenger side. So they have to make it narrower. You know, they could make these more uniform, but it's just the way they were. They were designed that way from the factory. So get this welded together, and once I'm satisfied with that, I get the clamps out of the way, and then I start using the spot welder. Now, this is where I've made a mistake, and I talk about this later. You know, I'm sitting here as I watch the video, and I'm like, yeah, you're making a big mistake here. So what I was in my mind, I was thinking, this spot welder is just going to make contact, and it's not going to care. It's just going to make heat. My mind is processing it kind of like a MIG welder, where you've got heat coming from the wire. And so when I first put up the spot welder, I was silly to me to think that it's just going to make contact, and it's not. So I bare the metal, and I'm still struggling with this. I'm like, wait a minute, I've got bare metal now. Why is it not working? You know, when you're doing a MIG, you have a ground. You've got something grounding out the metal, and you always want to make sure it's on bare metal. And I'm sitting here going, okay, well, maybe there's something wrong with the contact points. Is there a little buildup on them or something? Because it's been sitting, and maybe that's a problem. So I clean up the contact points, and then I decide, well, let me try this again and see what happens. So I repeat the process. You know, and now I'm like, there's something really going wrong here. I don't know what I'm thinking, why it's not working, but I had a spark a couple times, and then I was like, there's something really wrong. So I went and got some bare metal, some scraps, hooked them, you know, set them in the pinchers there in the jaws, and yeah, it welded perfect. And I thought, wait a minute, maybe I don't have enough bare metal on the front face of the apron. So I got a piece of emery paper out, or you know, like sandpaper, and sanded it to try to bare that metal. Well, it kind of sort of worked a little better, but the reality was I needed to bare the metal on the apron, on the back side of the flange. And that's what I ended up doing, because I was like, I have to have bare metal. It's not going to do anything unless I do all that. So that's what I did. I bared the metal, and then I followed the pattern, you know, of these of the apron, because like I said, the battery tray sits there, and I had sanded these a little bit too high, so I just went back and cleaned them, you know, cleaned it up a little more so I could make good contact. Once I did that, well, lo and behold, it started doing what it's supposed to do. And I point this out later. This tool, while handy, is very awkward. It's very heavy. I know a lot of people have said you should use that to do the windshield frames, or do the, you know, do this or that or the other. And that's, I guess, a possibility. But as heavy as that thing is, and I mention it later in the video, it weighs 27 pounds. So when you have your arms out in front of you and you're trying to support the weight of this thing, imagine holding it over a windshield frame. That would be very, very difficult. Okay, so that was a little bit of a learning curve, trying to get the spot welder to work, or the pinch welder. I didn't think about it. You know, I bared the metal on the back side of the core support. I didn't think about it being a problem on the mating surface. And ultimately, it probably wasn't. It was the fact that I left the paint on the back side of the apron. So we're going to try something. I know I got in there with that sandpaper, and I was trying to sand off anything on the in between. I feel like now I'm going to try it with just cleaning this up here, and then cleaning the back side and, you know, the front side. And so we'll see what happens. But that was, I don't know, my fault. I was probably not thinking correctly. You know, you kind of consider the idea that, oh, this is going to get hot. It'll just burn right through. But oh, it doesn't get hot until it makes contact. And that's the problem. It doesn't make contact on paint. It's got to be bare metal to bare metal. So I'm just kind of eyeballing this here. Had I thought about this prior, like I would have done this differently. But for now, we are where we are. Let's see if I can make this make more sense now. Like I said, I try to show you stuff. If I make a mistake, I want you to see it. You know, learn from what I do. I tell people sometimes, they say, you know, well, you're like a professional. Well, I say I'm still an amateur per se, but with tons of experience. And probably if I just get any kind of bare metal going, it's going to do what I want it to do anyway. And I also say, if nothing else, we can all serve as a bad example. That's the default. If nothing else, I can be a bad example for somebody. I don't want to do that. I want to be a good example. Okay, let's try it. Oh, that sounded better. Definitely getting hot. So now you know. It'll go through the weld through, but only on the mating surface, not on your contact points. Did I mention this thing is heavy? This is why I don't use it for a lot of stuff, because it is just awkward to operate in an efficient way. I'm going to come back to those other ones. Get this one down here if I can. You know, it's like, oh, this thing isn't that big. Can't be that hard to handle. It's like holding 30 pounds out in front of you. You know, just, and then squeezing it and hitting the trigger. It does a good job sometimes, but man, it can be challenge. Now, I want to tighten this up a little bit right down here. If I can get around that. Find out. Yeah. Okay. Smoke them if you got them. This flange isn't quite flat the way I want it. I kind of work it out a little so that the contact isn't just the clamp of the spot welder holding it together, which it ultimately will be, but the less I have to squeeze, the better. At least I don't have to work out today. It's like carrying a 30-pound dumbbell out in front of you. That can't sound good. Let's try that one again. Whew. I think that's all of them. Man, I'm telling you, it is. It's like 30 pounds. So, not going anywhere. Whew. As I like to say, that is not going anywhere. I have all the welds done except for the bottom ones. I'm not going to worry about those right now. I don't want to lay on the floor and crawl around and weld those. It's easier if I get it up in the air, so I'll worry about those later. I did grind down the welds here at the ends, and I put this nut clip on. I haven't put that one on yet. I'm working on this fender. Now, as I was saying before, it needs to go to the rear or aft. And what I found was this part of the lower cowl, there was a tall lip right here, like almost like a water catch, like you'd have water drain in and hit that lip, and then like this right here, you got that water catch to help it evacuate. And that was hitting, or at least the fender was hitting that. So I sanded that down. It's not that critical. You can put seam sealer in here and it'll be great. So that was hitting, and then I couldn't figure out the fender still wasn't fitting right. It wasn't coming back as far as I wanted it to. And you can actually see, here's some other witness marks from where it's making contact. I kept looking at it. Finally, I discovered there's a spot right here which isn't, readily visible, let's say, from looking for a witness mark. So right about there, the fender was hitting. And I had to, wiggle the fender to make the mark, and there it is. So that little corner right there, this needs to come off. And when I talked about these fenders not being, maybe not the right shape, I was talking about these spot welds on the other fender, and you can see even this alignment, you would assume that this would be in the same plane, just like this would be in the same plane, and here, but it's not. And I don't know that I'm going to have to worry about this side just yet, but I might. But for now, I need to clean up that, or grind that down. And you can see other areas. This is what I was talking about. It was making contact on that little gutter thing, and it was making some contact here. You can see it's got shiny metal. So that's a great way to find places where it's hitting. And I'll adjust and try to refit that. I've sanded down that high spot, or that tall area, and now oh yeah, now it goes back a lot further than it was. Get some bolts going over here. Get one there. I still have to move this hole, or this nut plate. Right here. And this hole in the front of the fender needs to go out. That helped a ton. I say a ton. A ton when you're doing this stuff, a ton is about that much. That much. That's a ton. So let me show you. I talked about this having to move back some, and that's how much I've gained in moving it back. Now, I can't say for sure if that's still enough to address the trim. So let me try to get it all the way across where it needs to be, and that's not going to be enough. It helps. It gets it a lot closer. And now there's like a super tight gap right here. And as I mentioned, I can move this door back just a little, and that'll probably help out that a lot. Now, the critical things, like this looks great. This is a bit tight up here. As long as I've got this line where I need it, and it follows the door all the way down, like the fender's not adjusted, it's just sitting here, so I can manipulate the fender, but that is really, really close to where I want it to be. Now let's see what I need to do. I still don't like how this ends up. Like, I want this further back and slightly up, so I may I may try that. I may take those spot welds out and see if I can't bring this up a little bit, and that might be enough if I can do that. So like I was saying, that's the same thing I mentioned on the other fender, and right now that actually looks pretty darn good to me, but I got to get that corner up. So to start this process, I have I don't know, maybe about a 3/8 drill bit, maybe 5/16. I don't know. I just kind of grab one that feels right, and I start drilling through the top of the weld. I'm not doing a hole. I'm just breaking through that top edge or the top part of the metal there, because you got two pieces. So I want to keep the bottom piece intact. Once I have that kind of drilled loose, I get out the body chisel, and these things are fantastic. If you don't use one already, you need to get one of these things. Again, there's links to all this stuff that I have on Amazon, but that tool is fantastic for doing just this. So I get these two welds loose, and the other two pop loose pretty quick, and now you can see things move. And this is good because I need to have some movement so I can make these adjustments. So I'm just using the tool here to show how much it can move and the play that is there. You know, I talk about it later. These fenders are not welded on that flange, on that back flange. They're only welded in a few spots to keep it together. So I set the fender back on the car, get some bolts in it, and I start looking at what kind of adjustments I need to make here. So I need that edge to come out, and I need it to go up. So a couple of things. So I'm using the body chisel. This thing's very stout. I mean, it works as a lever if you really wanted to, but I'm just trying to see what I can move and what I can adjust with that. I'm not trying to actually, reshape the metal so much. I'm just trying to see what can move. So now I'm refitting or setting up the windshield trim, and this is an aftermarket piece. I do have an original piece. It's not in the best of shape. I did the same thing with it and got the same results. So it's best to use matching pieces. So that side piece is also part of that kit. So when I'm doing this, I'm trying to see what kind of gap I end up with and whether it's going to be enough. And as I'm playing with reshaping this, now I'm deciding let's bend this a little bit, see if I can make it change the shape. And it does. The fender's moving around. And part of that is I don't have all the bolts in. So you'll see later on, I talk about this. I want to make sure I have enough bolts in there to hold it and put it where it needs to be. But I also want to try to make these adjustments without doing anything drastic, which I end up doing later, as you all know. It's just the way it is. So I want that piece to move outward a little bit or upward. So I'm just using a mallet here. I'm not wailing on it. I'm not trying to change it into a whole different shape. I'm just trying to get it to move a little bit. Now these welds, the panel actually kind of moved away, like it was like pulling it together. The tool did not bend those pieces. They kind of just sprung apart whenever I separated everything. And later on, I will weld that upper one, the inner piece that goes against the cowl. I haven't done that to the back section just yet. That'll come later on. All I'm trying to do is verify that I can make this thing fit. And I decide that I need this piece to move. So the decision is made at this point that I need to cut that and move it back into that pocket a little more. I want to try to eliminate as much of that gap as I possibly can. So I'm thinking about this and what I need to do, but you know what's happening. Ziz Wheel is next. Yeah, I know. I'm picky. When you look at this, and I will say, let me start off by saying I moved the door back even tighter. And that's a great gap. I mean, that looks almost dead on. This looks a lot better in just moving it back. We talked about this tiny section right here, and it may get a little bit of weld there, but it's not going to take much. Up here with the fenders, far back as I really want to get it, I looked at about 3/16 of an inch, and I feel like that's roughly where I'm at. This gap is really snug, and I like it. It looks good. However, things like this. Now this isn't much. This isn't, I mean, you could probably let that go, but I want to see this as more of a correct transition. It just doesn't look quite good enough, and this is going to bug me to no end because, you know, I can't change, or I can't move the fender further back without collapsing it into the door, and then that would be a bigger problem. And I feel like this is probably as close as I'm going to get for everything else to line up. So I've done this before, and I'm probably going to make a cut. And the reason for that is I want to bring this back a little, and I want to bring this back into this gap. When this car is done, when it's painted, I don't like to see odd gaps. And this is really a small movement. Now, when I cut those welds loose, it felt like it wanted to move that way, in a sense. Now, I know I've only got so much metal here. What I mean is, the welds, I showed it in the time lapse, they like change contact points. So I'm probably going to cut it somewhere right about here and try to shift this back. I don't want a gap here, and I want this corner to look better. So, little metal fabrication, and see if I can get this to look good. Yep, like I said, time to get out the thse wheel and do some customizing. I do this a lot. You know, you all see me making cuts and doing different things, and sometimes it's just the way it works. You know, aftermarket panels are different than factory panels, but I'm willing to do this to make it look right and make it fit right. So I start doing a thin cut, or like a short cut. Let's say, no, I'm not trying to go all the way through the metal on the first pass, and then I come back and go over it again, because I don't want to be too aggressive with it and maybe, you know, cut the line crooked. So I start cutting it loose, and I realize it's hanging on a little bit more than it should be on that one side there. So I need to do something about that. I try to cut this, I cut it loose a little bit more, not quite right. So I flip the fender over and attack it from the backside. This little area, that little corner, was holding on way better than probably anything else that is on this fender. So I'm trying to gently pry on it with a screwdriver, just trying to get it to come loose. And then I just start prying against the cut itself, you know, using like leverage there to try to get it loose. And I see there's a little bit of metal still hanging on, and then I work that loose. And finally, with a little fiddling around, playing with it, I'm able to get this to come off. And like I said, that little corner of that flange is what was holding on. It was really tight on there. And I've talked about this before. None of these flanges are welded. And I'll talk about it again later. You'll hear me mention it. But they're not actually welded. They're just crimped together. So, you know, making these kind of adjustments isn't that difficult because you're not separating actual welds. So here I am just kind of playing with it. What can I do? What can I make it, you know, where can I make it move? And I realized that little overlap, that little bent over flange is a little too tight. So pry it open and retest it and make sure it's going to clear that inner structure. So as I'm doing this, I'm visualizing where I want it to be and what I want it to look like. And the decision is put it back on the car, put the fender on the car, and get a look at it so that it can really see how things are going to line up. So here I'm using that body tool again, and I'm reshaping that inner structure. I'm trying to get it to comply and match the angle or the transition that I want it to be with the door. So it takes time. You know, I make these adjustments, and I don't just start welding and get in a big hurry. And then I'm refitting or retesting the trim. And I will say that later on, I put two of the clips on the trim itself so I could actually locate it on the cowl. I didn't want to just guess, so I had clips holding it whenever I was making other adjustments. So here I have it. I'm just visualizing what can I do, what can I move, where can it go, and I decide that I'm going to go ahead and weld this and get it in place and see what it looks like. You can see the lines there when you look at the line on the cowl, the body line. and the flow into the fender, it's on the same plane basically. You know, it's just the way that things are made. They're not a super tight fit. The cowl is kind of flatter. You know, it's almost like it makes a little uh, double-sided opening, like two little half moons in effect, but big kind of moon curves. And so you have one fading away and one going the other direction, and it just creates that pocket. So keep test fitting, see how close you can get the trim to fit, and get it to conceal as much of that as you possibly can. And I'm pretty happy with it. It's not to say that I may not do something later on, but for now, I think I'm okay with how this fender looks. So I got to thinking, I didn't have that bolt in the fender. And when you move the fender in the front here in and out, it changes the height of the back of the fender. It also kind of pushes it in and out a little bit. But when you rotate this out, it actually shortens, in effect, this back section of the lower fender. Now, I took it all back apart, and I not only put the bolt there, I also put the bolt inside where it attaches to the A-pillar, because I didn't want things moving. When I first tacked this on, I started pushing on it, and I saw that it was making the fender move. And I was like, wait a minute, this isn't quite right. And the more I played with it, the more I didn't like it. So I cut this loose a second time, and then put the hardware inside, have, you know, at least a couple of bolts up here on the top. Those are all that really matter. I don't have anything on the bottom. It doesn't need to be. But now the line is right where I want it on the door. And also, I wanted this line to continue as much as I could here. Now this stamping could probably be better. We all know that. But right now that flows and follows that line. So I have set the trim on, and it looks like it's going to cover most of this. You still might have a slight gap, but there's no more room. There's nowhere else to go. Like, I can't move this any further back. It's already in this radius. And this section over here, I may end up actually trimming that slightly. What I mean is, I may cut right on this edge and just move this section inboard or forward a little bit, because it's too tight on this edge of the door. Down here it looks pretty good. The gap looks pretty good. But this section here is just a little too tight. I want to have that more consistent. So for now, I have all this tacked in place. I can set the trim on and give you an idea. I try to get it as close to where I think it's going to end up, and you can see it covers that. Let me move this over a little bit. So yeah, I think it's right about there. So it just does cover that gap, which is good. That's all I really wanted, was eliminate that gap as much as possible. So I'm going to take this back off. Oh, and I also got my movement, maybe a little more. Before I do any final adjustments here, I'm going to probably set everything back on, look at the front of the hood and how it interacts with the extensions, because if I can bump this just a hair forward and maintain the gap that I want back here, then I may not have to do anything to this. So, you know how it is. You have to test fit stuff. Make sure it's right. Alright, I have set the hood on, and again, this isn't the hood we're going to be using. This is one that I have. This hood is in much better shape overall. Like the other hood, when I set it on, it was low, right in the middle there, and this one follows the shape of the cowl correctly. Back here, I left that alone, haven't changed anything. And up front here, this is going to work out. Now, there's nothing supporting the hood besides this block of wood. And so basically, once I adjust the fender, it's going to be really close. And there may be a little bit of fine tuning I need to do on this front edge, like square it up a little more, and that'll help this sit just a little bit deeper. But for now, that is really close and probably close enough. You know, I've also had an issue with another car that I did, where this front section of the hood, I added a little bit of metal to it just to get the transition right. And if that's what has to happen, that'll happen. But I think I think at this point we're okay. So I'm going to finish working on that, get it all welded, and I do believe I will be just trimming this a little bit, and not much, just a little. I need to move it that much. But it's looking good. I like it. So now it's time for some commitment. I am welding the 2 plug welds or spot welds that I had drilled out previously. I had a screw holding that together. So I took the screw out and I just welded those together. Those were the ones that face the flat surface of the cowl. And I showed you, drilling those out earlier. And then I just started tack welding the end of that gap together, filling it in, going back and forth, side to side. I'm trying to make this as stable as I can before I move on. And now what I'm going to do is move the fender in a more vertical position so I can attack it from the top. And normally when I do this, I weld in maybe a 2 to 3 inch span and spread out the heat a little bit. And in this case, it's not going to do much. I'm still not in a hurry. I'm not going to overheat this thing, but it's not like it's a flat panel like the side of a quarter panel. I'm working with a curve, so it's a little more forgiving. Here I'm taking the thse wheel and I'm going to cut loose that rollover flange where it meets the door. I want to move it away from the door a little bit. And so I just start making adjustments, seeing what I can move. And if it doesn't move far enough, I can make another cut and kind of get it to where it's going to look right. So I'm using the duckbill pliers here. That's something we use in the aircraft industry a lot. And just compressing that flange so that it fits tight on that inner structure. Continue to make adjustments and see if I can't get it to curve a little in the middle. And then that upper section, it just needed to be cut. So I'm trying to, make small adjustments as I go. And I tack welded that edge, that corner back together. And then that upper section there, I'm fighting with it a little, just trying to make sure it's compressed right. And I start welding it back together as well. Now, there's still a lot of adjusting to do, but I'm going to weld this together, make it solid. And then once I see how that looks, I'm going to move on to that upper piece. I realize it's not quite right, so I use the thse wheel to trim it back a little, clean it up, and then add some more weld. It just takes time. Cut, weld, blend, repeat until you get it to look the way you want it to look. So let's see how it looks after this. So this is where we're at. This all gets complicated because there's so many pieces that interact and overlap and all that stuff. So this, I like it. It feels much better. This gap is still a little bit tighter than I want it to be. And I know, I may have to modify it. And that's okay. If I do, I will do the same thing. I'll just cut a line on the edge and move this forward, and that'll take care of having too tight of a gap. However, I wanted to show you this. Hopefully this shows up on the camera okay. This is nice. I got all that. I like that. Now the trim, it's going to be tricky because you don't want this piece touching the fender. You don't want to come all the way down and be digging on top of the fender. So you can't technically, I guess you can bring it out like that. I know it's hard to see the variation there, but when you come out this way, it creates a gap back here. So it's a compound issue. I would rather it be like that. Now, even though we have a gap, it's consistent. It looks good. And you won't really see that when it's painted and everything else. But I don't want this sticking over the top like that. And now it's got a gap here. And you don't want that for sure. It's a huge gap. So I'd rather have this nice and snug, have a good line here, and this is consistent. It looks nice. It doesn't look like it's wonky and all over the place. So that is where that's going to end up. And that's okay. That's good. I'm happy with that. So I will continue to work on this, touch up a few welded areas, make sure it's all solid, and later on consider whether I want to mess with this edge or not, because I don't have any more room really to go back. It doesn't hit, I don't think it hits. Yeah, it does, a little bit right there, just a little bit on that corner. So odds are I'll be splitting this, moving that forward, but that's the way it is. Aftermarket parts, you gotta do what you gotta do. But overall, I think it looks pretty good. So I know how exciting it is to see me cut and weld and fit and cut and weld, but I didn't film any of this. I talked about it, and what I did was I took the thse wheel and I cut this back edge to determine where I wanted to put it. So basically, most of this is one width of the thse wheel, which is pretty small. Part of this was actually two widths, because there was a section here, you see this line I put up here, and it was somewhere down in this area. This section was actually more shallow than the lower section. And so what I did was I did the initial cut, and then I came back and I made a second line next to the first one. I trimmed it twice. So double width from the bottom up to somewhere, right there it is, there's the mark. Because this was actually going to be a little out of shape or short. So by doing a single cut here and a double cut here and a double cut here, now I've got a more consistent line when I put it back together. So currently it's just tacked. That's all I'm going to do is continue tack welding this all together. But I'll show you how it looks and how much better the gap is going to be when I'm finished. Now I'll point out, these fenders, we all know they have variables, but this flange is simply rolled around and crimped. It's not welded. So these fenders can shift and move, and once I cut all this loose, basically this just came off. There was nothing holding it against the inner structure. What I'll end up doing, once I'm happy with how this fits, I usually do this, I'll tack weld different locations to make sure it doesn't move anymore. And I do that with that. I do it with hoods and trunk lids, because all of these pieces are just pushed together. They're not actually welded. So I'll make that adjustment, or make adjustments and weld that as well. But I'll show you what it looks like before I finish welding all this up. Now you see my madness. Look at that gap. Beautiful, consistent. Oh, that looks so good. That compares very much to this gap. So I'm happy with that. Now I'll still need to do all this, welding here on this edge, grind it, smooth it up, but that is the way I want it to look. So I will continue on. If I make any other big progress, I'll show you, but that is the goal, is to get this fender taken care of, and then I get started on that one over there on a stand. I know, more of the same. I cleaned out the tip on the welding gun, starting to get a buildup in there, all the little sparks collect. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm going about 2.5, 3 inches, just little tack welds, not in a hurry. I want to make sure this is welded together without causing any kind of warpage or anything like that. So I go to the top side, do the same thing again to that, and then come back to the main section. And now I also have used air before to cool this stuff down. You'll see me do that here in a minute as well. But once it starts getting to be really solid, then I can go a little bit tighter on the welds, let's say. Obviously, I've sped this up quite a bit because it's not overly exciting, but it's kind of fun to watch the process. So now I'm taking the grinder. This sanding disc is like a 40 grit sanding disc. It's very, very rough, but it goes through the welds pretty quick. And you can't get in a hurry here either, because once you start being aggressive you can cut through that flange. Like you could weaken the flange. And I'm just trying to plane it out. I'm trying to make it as flat as I can. Now, what I'm doing here is just kind of taking some of the stresses out of the metal. Using a hammer and dolly after it's been welded just allows it to kind of relax a little bit with the impacts of the hammer and dolly. So now I've switched over to I think it's a 120 grit disc, and again keeping it flat as much as I can, trying to stay on plane with the main part of the fender. All right, I'm feeling pretty good about it. I had to make these adjustments, had to get the fender to move back, and you can see how much I moved it back, and that helped out with the front. And now I have a really nice gap all the way down. And I know it's hard to judge just how big or small that gap is, but that's about what you want. About a paint stick. A little bit over, and it's consistent all the way down. So I'm happy with that. I have to do this same kind of work to the driver's side as I mentioned, but I want to show you something else. As I'm going through these boxes and changing and fixing things and modifying things, here's something that I need to address sooner or later. This bracket kit. Dynacorn Mustang 6768 bracket kit for body shell fastback weld 2 primer. There's the part number. I've talked about it before. There is a bunch of brackets in here. Now some of these deal with like the fold down rear seat. Some of these are bumper mounts. Other pieces are for trim panels. And there's a whole bunch in here that has to get attached. And part of that is these 2 pieces. I've probably talked about it before. These belong up here. So I'm going to put those in. I'll try to show you that. Basically, this is not very complicated. It mounts into this upper edge up here, upper corner, and I'll show you how it fits. But this little corner ends up on the inside up here, and then this front edge lines up with the brace, the front header brace. So I'm going to put those in. I'll show you that. And as I go through this stuff, like there's the kick panel or side panel that is going to be in the car. And there's parts on order to do a seat delete, like a Shelby kit. So I'm going to be working on that before too long. And I have to do some customizing because this is the convertible reinforced floor pan, and they don't make those for a convertible. So this bottom section down here will need to be trimmed slightly, but the bigger thing will be the roll bar. Now they do make panels with a cutout already there for the roll bar, but that is for like a pre-built kit. Like if Mustang's Fear or somebody had a roll bar kit, they would have a panel built for that. So this, it really doesn't matter. I'm going to have to modify that one to make it fit. And it's just going to involve making a cutout on the side here so that that can go against the side panel. And there's room for it. It won't hurt anything, but that'll come later on. And then also fitting in all of these pieces as well to make sure they're all going to interact. We do have the fold down or the trap door, but there won't be a back seat. So I'll be working on that later as well. But for now, let me get these pieces in and show you where they go. So, if you remember, this was what Fangled started out as, and it was a green car originally, just so you know. But I want to show you these pieces. If I can get them in the frame. I can't see very well. Very bright out. Maybe? Maybe. But that's where those corner pieces go. And there's the other one. Hopefully it focuses on that. I don't know. Just trying to give you some insight. But that's what I use as my reference for those other pieces. So this goes in, and this corner or this edge lines up with the front. like so. And of course, you know, this hopefully is designed correctly so that it lines up later when the headliner and everything else is in. Basically, that's it right there. So I'm going to tack this in and then put a little better weld on it. It doesn't have to do much. Just holding the sun visor. But it needs to be there. Make that go where I want it. This isn't bent exactly the same. There we go. That's what I thought. Yeah, I like that better. I don't like this little corner sticking out. It won't hurt anything. It makes it a little easier to weld. Like I said, it's just holding the visor. Okay, so I'll put the other one in, and that's going to take care of that piece. Now, there's other brackets will have to go in, obviously, but I'll get those later on. Take it as it comes. So that's all I'm going to get done for this video. I will get the driver's side fender done. I'll take care of that and then move on to other things. As I mentioned, we're going to be working on the interior panels, and I will tell you that part of the kit, or part of those parts, or some of those parts, showed up today when I was finishing up with what I was doing. So let me show you. These two boxes showed up today. So we have the Mustang trim upper panel, 5-piece set. And that is above and in the rear of the back window area. Trims out everything, little short pieces. You'll see more of that later. And then these are the quarter vent trim pieces. So these go on the inside of the car where the sail panel is. They have the chrome vent piece in the middle. And I think there may be something else involved with that, because there's actually an opening that says open close. So I'm assuming, you know how that is, I'm assuming there is an actual vent that went in there. You know, that's why they made them this way, so you could open those up and get air in. But that's not part of that kit. So we'll have to figure that out later on. I don't know if we're going to just block those off completely, but the louvers that we have, I think they'll actually let air in. So we may look at that a little bit harder and see what we do. And now you know. So that'll be it for this video. I want to say thank you to my patrons for being here and helping support me in making these videos, but I want to thank you as well. If you want to be involved with my Patreon program, there is a link in the description box down below. Essentially what it does is it helps me, or it helps compensate me for what I'm doing to make these videos, because YouTube just doesn't pay much of nothing anymore. And it's beneficial to have sponsors on Patreon. So if you're interested, there is a link down below. And again, anything that's highlighted or I show in the videos that it pops up a little link or something like that, I get a little percentage out of those if you make a purchase. And there is also my Amazon page and everything else. But if you're interested, that's fine. If not, I get it. I get it. It's the way it is. But that's okay. That's it for this video. So until next time, take care of yourselves. See ya. And sometimes you just have to cut, weld, hammer, whatever. No. So this isn't quite a, dead on. So I got to thinking, when I was putting that fender up, I didn't have this bolt in the front, and that changes the index of the like it was out of shape. This actually follows the shape of the blah 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 blah. Get the big ugly hand out of the way. There's still a little bit of blah blah. Gotta find my glasses first. Okay. This, well, it'll fall into the car. So we covered those items today, or this week, or so that's what I covered.